Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. This is my weekly compendium of case reports between the 6th to the 11th of January, 2021. Case files number 22 to 26. Case file number 22, written by user RunnerGirl2001. Friend tried to set him up with Maggie. This led to possibly saving his life, only his friend never did set him up. All names used here are fake. So here's some background. I was trying to get over an ex at the time. Then my friend Maggie randomly texted me saying, "Hey, would you be opposed to going on a date with Audrey?" Audrey is a mutual friend. I say no. I try to talk to her, but I don't feel any sparks. The next day, I try to ask a group of friends to hang out. There's one girl in the group, and one of the other friends in the group texts me saying, "Dude, stop hitting on Alexandra, focus on Audrey." I'm like, ugh. Later that day, I was spaced out at a traffic light, completely sober, when the truck in front of me turns right. I automatically think, the light must be green. So I go. I hear some honking behind me, but I ignore it. I was halfway through the intersection, 30 miles per hour back road with a 55 mile per hour highway, when I realized the light was red, and for some reason, I stopped in the middle of the intersection. I heard a car behind me swerve to not hit me, so I kept going and had to stop on the side of the road to process what just happened. This is when things get weird. My friends never mentioned Audrey to me again, and a month later, she starts dating someone else, Jake. I assume that was the reason why. However, a few months later I bring up to Maggie about how she tried to set me up with Audrey, but she just stares at me blankly and says, "No, we were trying to set her up with Jake." I thought she was pulling my chain, but I went back to old text messages, and I couldn't find any that mentioned Audrey in the first place, let alone friends trying to set me up with her. The weird thing about this experience is I didn't black out. I was conscious the whole time. I don't know if I died and switched to another reality, but I know damn well that I wasn't imagining this. Also, Maggie claimed she had been having consistent dreams of me dying, and they stopped when this event happened. Edit. I texted Maggie, asking if she remembered trying to set us up together, and her response was, "No, Audrey and Jake were together, I'm pretty sure." Case notes, file number 22. So my impression of this isn't a quantum immortality crossover scenario, because you don't remember your death. It's true that not every single case of quantum immortality involves remembering the specifics of the originating death. But if we go back to case number 19, they didn't remember the details either. They kinda whisked back 20 minutes in the past. Although one of the listeners mentioned a theory that perhaps this was just a premonition, not quantum immortality. I like that theory, so maybe that's why. It's also the fact you didn't remember any details, and also that Maggie was having dreams of you dying prior. That detail is weird. So there's some element of premonition involved here too, perhaps. Maybe your mind was syncing subconsciously with hers, leading to you spacing out near and in that intersection, where you were lost in thought about Alexandra and Audrey. If you hadn't spaced out, perhaps that swerving car would have hit you. One little domino tumbling, leading to a cataclysmic fate. Case file number 23. Written by user TACQTime. What happens when you experience an intense physical episode, a sort of panic attack with great anxiety, then find out a loved one passed away almost exactly in that moment? My dad died in December of 2017. I lived with him until December 4th, when I moved out into my own one-bedroom apartment. I worked all day December 5th, then December 6th was my day off. I spent the day buying things for my new apartment and organizing, and then around noon, I had really fast and drawn out heart palpitations, unlike I've ever had before or since. I seriously thought I was going to die for a moment because it lasted for almost 5 seconds, which is a long time when your heart is on the fritz. After that, I had an overwhelming feeling of sadness and guilt, and I just sat on the floor crying for a while. I couldn't explain the source of sadness I was experiencing. I'm usually pretty good at pinpointing why I'm feeling a certain way, but there just was no reason for it. I texted my dad, "Hey Dad, how you doing?" But I never got a response. The next day at around 7 p.m., my sister and I went to check on my dad because nobody had heard from him in a while. We found him dead in his bed. Now, this next part may sound a bit morbid, but this is the reason I think my dad died when I had heart palpitations and an extreme feeling of sadness. My mom looked up a decomposition chart to try to calculate exactly how long he had been dead, and based on the state of his body when we found him, he would have died the day before at around noon. I won't get into the specifics of what killed him, but it was related to his heart. Edit. I'm amazed at the number of similar stories you all have to share here. It seems we're all connected to our families more than we think. I would encourage anyone reading this thread to look at the comments because there are some amazing stories here. Thank you all for opening up about your personal experiences. I am legitimately honored that I could provide this thread where we can all share these strange occurrences together. I am very sorry to everyone who has experienced the loss of a loved one. It's not easy at all. My heart goes out to you. Case notes, file number 23. Well, first off, I'm going to offer my sincere condolences. There are a lot of glitches that relate to our own mortality, and it's just sad to read them. But it is good that we can share them together. I agree with you there. It also provides so much insight into our universe, how it works, or at least fragments and clues. I think I agree that there's some sort of connection that we all share. At the fundamental level, for example, particles can be entangled and connected, and we don't really understand how. We can't use it to transmit information, at least not as we understand it now, but they're still connected. At the macro level, it seems our emotions, related to concentration and focus on specific objects or people, how much we think of something, lead to the forging of these bonds. It's almost like memories, actually. If you have a memory of something you learned, or something you just remember, the more you think about it, the more the pathways for those synapses are reinforced, and you can recall that memory easily then. But if you never think about it, it's very hard to access. But perhaps more accurately, the perception or tapping into the bonds that always exist between us all. So it's like the memories are always there, we just can't always access them. I can't pretend to know the specifics, I'm speculating. I'm also reminded of a previous case, the case file number 9, where someone's pet had astral projected his future emotional state into the mind of his owner. It's a small glitch per se, but very striking. Even with our pets, anything we connect strongly with, we can sense what's happening to them, and perhaps even what will happen to them later. Case file number 24. Written by user StormWolf1337. He was swimming, just a normal day, but started to drown. Panic ensued. Friends panicking. Then he was alright. Was this quantum immortality with a teleportation event too? I've told this story so many times before, and to this day I have no rational explanation for it, nor does anyone that has analyzed the sequence of events. It began on a trip to a popular creek many would gather at to party, take a dip, or just hang with the family. The water of the privately owned creek was dark and about knee level for a regular adult, with even children being able to wade most of it without worries. There was a small deep section that was more to the far edges, but I was unaware of this. It was summer vacation when I was about 16 or 17, I think, and I got my group together for a huge party there. After a few hours of us partying and hanging on the shore, a few of us took a dip. My swimming skills are nothing amazing, but I can at least not sink like cement. I began wading out a bit, and within seconds I felt my feet completely slide off the edge of the shallower bit into the deep end. I could feel the forward momentum of my slipping carrying me forward a lot too, so much so that I couldn't even reach the edge with my toe tips. I began to panic and sink. It felt like that was the end, that surety of death after gulping down nothing more than cold water. I couldn't get a foothold, much less propel myself in any direction. As I swallowed mouthfuls of liquid, hoping for oxygen, I could feel the darkness of the water itself just surround my consciousness, as if I was being taken by that cold abyss. At that point, I kinda came to terms with death. This is it, I'm done. At that exact moment, that exact thought, I felt a spark of pure energy. To hell with this, I'm not gonna die, was the only thought I had left. I attempted to flail a bit. It was a useless movement, but I wasn't giving up. Somehow or another, I ended up back completely on the shallower bit, my feet firmly planted on muddy soil that wasn't there a second before. Not on the edge of the shallow bit, but about 4 feet away from the deep end. I then saw everyone rushing towards me, my friends swimming frantically. To their eyes, I was in the deep end but a second ago, about to drown. And the next I had saved myself before they were even halfway to me. Not more than a minute or two had passed, yet for me, it seemed so much longer, my perception of time changing because of adrenaline, who knows. There was simply no way I could have moved that distance through my weak flailing at the limits of my breath. I moved at least 6 or 8 feet total, as 2 dudes in the group swam out to where they saw me. And also based on the distance from the slope that ends the shallow bit to the deep end. It was a considerable distance if you aren't swimming. They were all pretty dumbfounded. No one knew what the hell happened, but we were all just bloody relieved. We've discussed that event so many times, yet it remains a genuine mystery to them and me especially. Maybe I teleported. Maybe I was saved by some higher being, a guardian angel even. All that I'm certain of is that I might have teleported through space-time before that spark of life left me. Case Notes, File Number 24. This is peculiar indeed. As I'm reading this, my gut instinct is to assume a crossover. That you died, quantum immortality saved you, effectively loading a save state into another universe. But the odd thing is your group seeing this happen. That you were drowning and then you weren't. You'd have remembered drowning, but the group wouldn't have seen anything out of the ordinary. Unless it's sort of a combo. Maybe a guardian angel saved you in the quantum immortality crossover universe, not the original one, but where you ended up. That seems unlikely though. Why save you after you crossed over? Unless for some reason your consciousness needs to inhabit this version of yourself. I don't know. It's a stretch, to be sure. But outside of actual teleportation, which shouldn't be possible, and I haven't really read any accounts of that. Of course you could say, well, maybe adrenaline just gave you ultra strength for a second, and you managed to propel yourself much further than you think? Maybe. I guess I can't discount that. But I'm sure as you were there, and as your friends describe it, it just doesn't seem like that. They would have seen ripples on the water move. Let us know if anything else odd or, let's say, important happens to you in the future. I'm very curious. Case number 25, written by user Isalane. She made a call to her dad while he was visiting relatives, and this happened 30 years ago. Her dad just recognizing this call way in the past as his daughter's voice. I recently posted about me disappearing into thin air when I was sleeping. And my family couldn't find me when I woke up. They swore up and down that they searched all over for me, but weren't able to find me. This is not an update, but something that just happened yesterday. 3 days ago, I was having a conversation with my father, and he was telling me about his university life. My dad came from nothing. He had a very difficult upbringing, and went to the worst school and high school in our city. When it was time for him to join university, my grandfather passed away, leaving my dad to take care of the rest of the family, as he was the oldest son. He took the wrong major because of the terrible advice from some people. He severely regrets that to this day. The courses were taught in English, which is a second language for us. He didn't even know the language. My dad told me that it was the darkest time in his life, and he just wanted to run away. He was even thinking of taking his own life. Now, very recently, he got his master's in English literature. He was telling me that he didn't think it would ever be possible for him. My dad just recently finished this degree at the age of 55. The next morning, my dad had to drive to this town because his distant relatives live there, and they're struggling financially. My dad is a very kind soul, and he wanted to help them. The town is 3 hours drive away. He usually takes public transport, but didn't because of the recent crisis. He drove there and my mom was worried, so we decided we'll give him a call every hour to check. Well, I decided to call him. Now, keep in mind, because it's a highway, network signals get very weak. He told me to wait and parked at a nearby restaurant. It was like a checkpoint for trucks. I don't know what came over me, but I started crying and went on to tell him about how proud of him I was. I just babbled and kept saying that he shouldn't think he's lacking because he's not. He was an amazing father and a great person to look up to. You guys, my dad just started crying. He told me that he'll talk to me when he returns. Well, he returned, and he just hugged me and was telling me about how 30 years ago he was visiting the same town, and it was the time when he was at his lowest. He was visiting the same relatives, and he was on a bus which stopped at a petrol station. He called his mother, and when he picked up the phone without even dialing, he heard my voice. It was telling him the same thing which I had just said yesterday. He said that he didn't even call my grandmother. He just stood there and cried. It gave him the strength to keep fighting. He said he just now realized that it was me whose voice he had heard back then. My parents are now taking this as a sign from God, who helped my dad when he thought no one else was there for him. Case notes, file number 25. This is such a beautiful tale. So either God gave him the impression of your voice talking to him, a daughter that he didn't even know he was going to have, the exact words he needed to hear at the time to save him. As you mentioned, he was even contemplating suicide, so it really did save him. Or somehow your call transcended time in a way that really defies the traditional sense of time travel, because normally any kind of connection to the past would involve a parallel universe. This helps to avoid paradoxes. But maybe this isn't always the case. One way or another, you helped your dad before he even had you. It's just truly beautiful. I think that's all I need to say here. I'm proud of your dad and of you. Amazing. Case file number 26. Written by user Impressive Picture. It was a night's walk, urged on by an inner voice, leading to the impression of total and absolute isolation and panic. Was this a crossover? Last night at 10:30 p.m. to 12 a.m., I was out for a walk. I live in a town with no curfew in place, so I don't believe that can excuse these experiences. It started as such. At around 10 p.m., I had a sudden urge to just go outside for a walk. This isn't the first time this has happened, as I have previously heard a voice in my head saying, "Take a walk," over and over again on multiple occasions since I was 9 years old, always at nighttime. This time it was simply a feeling and urge though, not a voice. So I got my laptop, gathered together a playlist of music, and went. Immediately after leaving my house, a slight but not too noticeable feeling of paranoia kicked in. I ignored it and headed to my first destination, that being the playground about 3 blocks away from me. Along the walk, I did feel some strange feelings, which we'll go into more depth about later, of isolation and fear. But I continued on, telling myself that fear is what sets humans back from having beautiful experiences. I arrived at the playground and sat on a bench for a few minutes, being relatively calm. Not too many noticeable things here. After sitting for about 7 minutes, I got up and began walking back home, but had another destination in mind. The destination was the hill which overlooked my town and the one next over, and a bit of the Atlantic. As I neared my house, I made the decision that I was going to go to the hill. So I passed my house and turned to go down the main road. Here's where things begin to get a little strange. Keep in mind that I live in a normally busy town with cars going through all day and night. As I'm walking down the main road that cars usually are traversing down, I see absolutely no cars passing me by on the road. None. A strange feeling of paranoia began rising in me as I made my way downtown, a feeling which I'll touch on later. As I arrived downtown where the road split into a roundabout, there were still no cars, not even on the main roundabout. I took off my headphones momentarily, and I heard nothing. And I mean genuinely nothing. Absolute dead silence. It was completely quiet except for the flowing of the river which was near me. Not even the sound of the cars on the highway in the distance were present. This got me a little weirded out, but I kept moving. As I crossed the road, I looked at the big Christmas tree that my town had. The white wooden fence around it, the white lights, the benches surrounding it, all felt very strangely familiar, yet mildly uncomfortable. The feelings of paranoia began to rise, but I had not yet distinguished what they were about. I made my way up the road and turned onto the road which would lead me to the top of the hill. The feelings of paranoia kept rising as I got closer to the top of the hill, and about halfway up to the top I was able to distinguish finally what the paranoia was about. It was about being completely alone. I realized at that moment that I, from what I could tell, was completely alone. I began to feel like the reality I was experiencing wasn't even my reality, that something was wrong, that I might have shifted realities. The feelings of paranoia worsened as I got closer to the top of the hill. Eventually, I reached the point where the street lamps cut off and only the dim blue moonlight lit the road in front of me, which it did quite well. This is when I heard a voice in the back of my head say, "There's no saving him now." I ignored this voice again, on the notion that fear is what causes humans to not have beautiful experiences. The feelings of paranoia were very noticeably high at this point, as I made my way down the dimly lit road to the viewing point. The viewing point was surrounded by a forest, but part of which had been cleared into flat land, so that people can play with their dogs and not have to navigate their way through woods to get to the viewing point. I walked up the couple of stairs that led to this plain, which was completely illuminated by the moon, and turned to the right to see the viewing point. The feelings of paranoia now were slightly lowered because of the beautiful sights in front of me, but they were still there. I walked over to the bench, which overlooked the view, and sat down on it. As I sat there, I noticed something. There were no birds. It was completely silent. There was nothing but the occasional wind. No cars could be heard, nothing. This I found was extremely unusual, even for a winter night. For the moment though, I ignored this and kept looking at the view. It was beautiful, but something about it felt strangely familiar, yet slightly uncomfortable, like the Christmas tree. As I observed the sky, I took note of how the sky looked somewhat like a dome, and I began pondering to myself, what if none of this is real? What if all this is made just for me? I sat on these questions for a bit before pulling out my laptop to change a few songs. This is where things started to get very strange. As I pulled out my laptop, the paranoia shot back up immediately, and it was now extremely noticeable to the point where it was bothering me. At this point, strangely, both my headphones and laptop died, despite both of them being relatively well charged. Just after this, I got an immediate sensation in my body of panic. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me, "You need to leave now. You're in severe danger." Nothing caused this sensation. I wasn't hearing or seeing anything. In fact, as I said, it was completely silent. This is when I took note that there weren't any cars in the distance either. You could see 2 towns over with this view, yet I saw no cars passing at all. The absence of the cars and the birds and all sounds now were contributing to the paranoia. The paranoia, speaking of, was now overwhelming as I scrambled to bag up my things, my body still screaming at me to leave immediately. I no longer had the sensation of being alone, but the sensation of being chased or watched. I quickly zipped up my bag with my laptop and headphones and ran out of the viewing spot and onto the road. Where I ran from the viewing spot, the panic still stabbing at me, feeling like I might cry from it. I nearly slipped, and that's when I began to just slow down and walk. As I noticed that the further I got from the viewing spot, the calmer I began to become. I made my way down to the road, which would lead me back downtown and back home. That's when I looked behind. I saw nothing, but the feeling of, don't go back there, or something will happen, was there, and palpable. Funny thing is, after leaving the hill area, I started seeing cars and people. Downtown was no longer empty, and I could hear cars in the distance. Thoughts were running wildly through my mind as I made my way back downtown. A theory I had is I may have shifted realities to one where I was completely alone, and that if I had stayed there, I would have permanently been shifted to that reality. The walk back home no longer felt alone, it felt normal, as my day walks did. It felt like I was at home. That's when I took notice that when I was walking downtown, that was one of the many things that felt off. It was like it felt like I wasn't in my original reality. Everything about it was off. What do you guys think the explanation is, if there is one? Case notes, file number 26. So I'm thinking of shadow people here, reading this. So there's nothing at all suggesting that you had died here. The catalyst is unknown. But I brought up the shadow people because of a few experiences I read prior. One I narrated here, actually. I forget the case file. I think case file number 7. I'll have to check. Anyways, there are people stuck in the limbo realm between occupied realities. That's what I think shadow people are. I think this ties into simulation theory too, where effectively you loaded into an empty server. You were not meant to be there. This gave you a truly overwhelming sense of loneliness, being trapped into oblivion, forgotten, erased almost. A sense of despair. Your conscious mind couldn't quite piece together what was wrong, but your subconscious knew this isn't right. It makes you wonder if there aren't a bunch of lost souls stuck in realms or servers they aren't meant to be in, all alone. None of this explains how you escaped though and transitioned back into an occupied universe. I'm glad you did though. Maybe a developer or game dev just moved you out. Of course, why they wouldn't do this with the other lost souls there, I don't know. Maybe it's not as simple as that. Maybe this is what a guardian angel is too. Basically, the developers or moderators are paying attention, but there's just so many people that they can get lost and forget some people, or just some slip through the cracks and they can't be found. If simulation theory is true with quantum immortality and multiverse theory, then perhaps there are just so many servers running concurrently that they can't keep track of them all. I don't know. It's a very interesting thought though, I think. I'd also touch on those inner voices, just saying my instinct is they're sort of like cheat sheets from your real hosts in the world, kind of relaying messages, not directly, but sort of, without you knowing where they're from. Yeah, just an idea. And that concludes our case files for the night. If you enjoyed them, and my narration of them, consider leaving a like, and also subscribing. I upload Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 p.m. EST with new case files all the time. I'll see you there.